All right, let's talk about Canada now, shall we? Because they've got a crisis on their hands. So here's the new Liberal strategy in Canada, or so it would appear. Have your Conservative opponent arrested. Didn't they try this in America, trying to arrest Donald Trump? Liberals tried this and it failed miserably.
It's working well in France, though.
I guess. Yeah, I think it's with Marine Le Pen. Well, Liberal MP and candidate Paul Chiang suggested that someone should abduct his Conservative opponent, take him to the local Chinese consulate, and collect a $183,000 bounty for dissident critics of communist China. Yeah, a bounty on this guy's head. Everyone should go and arrest my opponent right now. Watch this.
The other person that's running most probably is, the Chinese community knows, Zhou Zhang Jing. Right? He's looking for the nomination. The Chinese media knows him. He was in the media business in Hong Kong, and here in Canada, he's a radio host, or I don't know, for Singtel Media, or Fairchild, he was a media person. So that's all he did all his life. But also right now, he is wanted by the Chinese government, and there's a $1 million reward on his head. So they want, if you guys want to pick him up and take him to the Chinese consulate, you make him $1 million. I'm just joking. But there is a arrest warrant out for him from the government of China, and there is.
I'm just joking, but seriously, guys, there is $1 million bounty. So if you guys want to make $1 million, we know times are tough here in Canada. Go arrest my opponent so I can win this election. David Krayden has been following this. He's an independent journalist out of Ottawa, Canada. He writes at the Post Millennial. He's got the great channel as well, David's Right on YouTube, and he's been posting about this and following the craziness of the Canadian election. David, I mean, what happened to this guy now? Can you update us? Where do things stand with this? Has the guy been arrested? Has he stepped down? What's happening?
Well, Paul Chiang has stepped down. But what's incredible about this is not just that anybody, a sitting member of parliament, would stand in front of a crowd and suggest they abduct his opponent, bring him to the Chinese consulate, and claim the reward. It's $1 million Hong Kong dollars, by the way, which translates to about 183,000 Canadian. This would be bad enough if there wasn't so much Chinese interference in Canadian elections. The Canadian Security Intelligence Service has documented this. A whistleblower came out about a year ago and said that the Chinese government may have bought at least 2 elections for Justin Trudeau. Wow. That MPs across the Greater Toronto area have been targeted by communist China. So this is a guy in the Markham constituency. It's the Greater Toronto area. And we also had a report last year, of course, saying 11 members of parliament were actively being influenced by foreign governments, namely China. In other words, they were possibly spying for China, and they were sitting in the House of Commons. So this guy has the gall to stand up before a crowd and suggest they turn in his opponent. And is there no common sense here? It's bad enough, but given the fact that we know the Chinese are interfering in our elections, this just makes it doubly bad. And what really is the kicker is that Mark Carney defended this man until the last minute. He said, he's been a police officer for almost 30 years. He's a man of integrity. He had a brief lapse of judgment here, and I'm standing behind him. It took a possible investigation and charges by the RCMP to finally induce Paul Chiang to say he's stepping down, and Mark Carney really said nothing about that either. But Mark Carney is in China's pocket. We already know that. I've talked about this in...
Let's talk about this. This is because I think for people that might be watching, they might be saying, oh, we've heard this before, Russian interference in U.S. elections, a hoax and all this stuff. So China is in Mark Carney's pocket. Can you lay out the evidence here?
Or Carney is in China's pocket because he has been working throughout the years.
Right, yeah, exactly.
You have to remember, Mark Carney has been a governor of the Bank of Canada, governor of the Bank of England. He's an internationalist, he's a globalist, but he's also firmly a believer that communist China should be the economic engine of the world, and that the Chinese yuan, should replace the American dollar as the global currency. He's on record as saying this in a speech in Jackson Hole, Wyoming in 2019. He said it again last year. He said it in other appearances. He's also praised China for its environmental policies, which of course is insane, because whether or not you're talking about the greenhouse gases that Mark Carney is obsessed with, or you're talking about real pollution, nobody pollutes it better than China. So Mark Carney is constantly coming to communist China's defense. And the last October, while he was working for the government of Canada, he went to Beijing ostensibly to talk about how China and Canada could forge closer relations, though I don't know how they could be any closer. But he took the time to talk to the central bank in Beijing about securing a loan for his company, Brookfield Assets Management. And he managed to walk away from China with $276 million in loans from the central bank. So when Pierre Poilievre asks, can we in any way trust Mark Carney to work for Canada? Is this man fatally compromised for China? I think the answer is obvious. Yes, he's compromised. He's been working for China. His goal as prime minister will be, as he said, to replace the United States as the world leader with China. So I call Mark Carney a Manchurian candidate, because I think he's been installed by the globalists as well as the Chinese,
and
who
funded.
are functionaries.
Right.
Yeah, and funded by them.
But that makes him, like you said, an extension of Justin Trudeau, because if you could, please remind us of the Trudeau's love affair with China. So why is this sound so similar?
Well, that's exactly it, Natalie, because a lot of people have been ignoring the Chinese factor. And they're just saying, well, he's been a banker, he has to deal with China. It's suddenly people are saying, well, why did he defend this MP with such veracity? Why did he insist he was standing behind it? Was he afraid of insulting his Chinese masters? It certainly would appear that way. And as you say, it's Justin Trudeau famously, even before he was Prime Minister of Canada, he was at a Liberal fundraiser and he was asked, which economies, which countries do you most admire in the world? And Justin Trudeau, without blinking an eye, simply said, China, the basic dictatorship, because it can turn things around on a dime. It can implement, and he said it, climate change policies immediately without even having to have popular support for those policies. So that's the kind of person Justin Trudeau was. Mark Carney has built his career on net zero policies, on anti-energy policies. And that's exactly what Justin Trudeau has been. So is there any
Do they
difference
not
between these
understand that China's energy policy is we will continue to innovate until we peak in carbon emissions, and then the technology will be such that we lower carbon emissions because we get better and better at it, and we will improve our economy to the betterment of our people, as we damn well see. That is not the Trudeau-Carney line. They want you to live without. The Chinese government does not. So are they thick?
I think there's a deliberate delusion going on here with China, because China has a policy of really being China first, and to hell with anyone else in the earth who wants to get in their way. And nobody is firing up more coal plants than China. And of course, that's supposed to be anathema to people like Mark Carney. But you know what really has amazed me is that the Conservative Party finally had Mark Carney in their target. They finally had the mainstream media asking him questions about his relationship to China, about whether or not he was tied too closely to China, and why would he possibly stand behind this fatally flawed candidate. So what did the Conservative Party do? They decide to go on an internal purge the following day, and they start getting rid of candidates who they think are not saying the right things. And this has totally outraged the Conservative audience in Canada, who are saying, what the heck is going on with this Conservative campaign? You finally make your point about Mark Carney being in the pocket of China. You finally make the point that he's got candidates out there who have no right to be, or no business to be running for office. And you decide to go after Stéphane Marquis, a Montreal area candidate who could possibly have knocked off Stephen Guilbeault, the environmental extremist who was the environment minister under Justin Trudeau. And they accuse, guess, you'll love this. What do they accuse Stéphane Marquis of? Well, he was spreading conspiracy theories. What kind of conspiracy theories, you ask? Well, he was suggesting Bill Gates was getting rich off of pharmaceuticals and vaccines. He was suggesting that COVID vaccine wasn't entirely safe and effective. He was suggesting that the war in Ukraine had something to do with the expansion of NATO. Wow. And there's outrage about this complete attack, assault on freedom of speech.
Yeah, you can't talk about those things, of course. I mean, so I just don't understand this obsession with China and being paid off. I mean, we saw now the millions of dollars the Biden crime family were paid at the hands of China, liberals in Canada as well, Trudeau, of course, and his influence with China, and now Mark Carney, his massive influence and funding from China. And then not to mention the fentanyl crisis, which of course has poured in from China right into the port of Vancouver and is not being checked by the Canadian government at all. It's almost like Canada has been completely taken over by China.
Well, and the irony here is that, of course, Donald Trump has endorsed Mark Carney twice. He has said that Mark Carney will win this election. He understands Mark Carney. He even calls him Mark. And he refers to him as the Prime Minister of Canada, not the governor of the 51st state, as he did with Justin Trudeau. These two seem to be very chummy indeed. But the irony, as I say, is that do you think for a minute Mark Carney is going to do anything to stem the flow of fentanyl into this country that's coming from China? It's all coming into the Vancouver ports. And there's been tremendous research coming out of investigative journalists in this country about that flow of fentanyl going into Vancouver and then going across the U.S. border. And we've talked about this previously. But does Donald Trump, if he really thinks his issue with Canada is, one, border security, and number two, flow of fentanyl, does he really think Mark Carney is going to improve matters at all when he is so much beholden to China? China will continue to pump fentanyl into Canada under Mark Carney, probably more so than it did under Justin Trudeau. I think Pierre Poilievre, as flawed as he appears this week, has a better security plan and is more imposed to want to go after the flow of fentanyl into Canada. And I think Donald Trump's making a fatal mistake by endorsing Mark Carney and supporting him in such a vocal and obvious way that he is.
Yeah, I don't understand that at all. But, you know, I guess there are a lot of smarter people out there than me that can figure this out. Why is Trump supporting Mark Carney? I don't know. Yeah. I can't figure it out. David Krayden, thank you for staying on top of this story and calling out the conservatives as well for not putting enough pressure on this Chinese influence into Canada. And it's real, and it's deeply troubling. David, great to see you as always. Thanks so much.
Thank you both.